Hello, this is Martin Gore from Depeche Mode.
Hi, this is Dave Gahan from Depeche Mode, and you are listening to
My Nerd World.
And welcome to Depeche Mode, the podcast. I'm your host, Jon Justice. Thank you so much for checking out another episode this week. I'm anticipating that it's going to be relatively short for the podcast, mostly because there continues to be no news out of the Depeche Mode camp relating to, as always, those 4 fully produced Memento Mori unreleased tracks or a physical release of the Memento Mori tour. So in terms of content, there was very little. I'm also really tired. This is election week in my world. I've been incredibly busy. I got a full night's sleep last night, but before that, between Monday and then going into last night, I was working on only about 2.5, maybe 3 hours of sleep. But thankfully, I'm rested today. But because of that, anticipating a somewhat shorter show. As a matter of fact, I'd forgotten that I actually found one thing related to Depeche Mode that was completely brand new to share with you. And we do have some listener feedback to talk about as well. You can email me, TalkShowNerd@gmail.com, or if you're enjoying Depeche Mode, the podcast, on YouTube, I would encourage you to leave a comment there, and we'll share your comments on the show. And, I'd love to know, again, what Depeche Mode are you listening to? I don't get a lot of response relating to that, and I think it's because we all just kind of listen to Depeche Mode all the time, so to say which Depeche Mode we're listening to probably isn't as relevant, because if you were to ask me what Depeche Mode are you listening to, I would probably tell you the same thing. Or I would say, well, I'm listening to a lot of different Depeche Mode. But I know on occasion I get into a Depeche Mode mood where I'm only listening to, certain genres or one particular album. So I just am always interested to hear how people are enjoying their DM. So as always, you can drop me an email or a comment up on YouTube, and I'll share that on the show. So in doing my prep for the show, as I do my weekly news and internet searches to find out if anything new has popped up. I also head over to the Depeche Mode home forum to see if there's any interesting threads or something that I thought was worthy or, fun to go and share on the show. And this is something that I actually found this week. So let me talk a bit about this, a portion of a thread that I found on the Depeche Mode home forum, and then we'll get to how Depeche landed on the list, or a list, of 5 of the best live songs in music history. So on the forum, they have a got a question, get an answer thread that's up there. And Exciter is a really interesting album to me. It represents the band after all of the turmoil, and even after Ultra, and there was turmoil on that, and we got past the singles tour. This, to me, is the album that's the most fully realized in the wake of the departure of Alan Wilder. And I've done my retrospective before, a few years back on Exciter, and I'm interested at some point to going back through all the albums again. Just as time progresses, you get new perspectives on the albums, right? But Exciter to me was, all right, so Depeche Mode's been through everything they've been through. They lost Alan Wilder. Ultra, we weren't even sure was going to be a record. Dave was still dealing with his drug addiction at the time. And then we ended up with the singles tour, a couple of tracks, new tracks that were a part of that, dovetailing off of the, Ultra sessions. But here, the band's finished touring, they've taken a break, and then they've gone back into the studio, put their past behind them, and they're marching forward as a trio without all of the baggage that came before it. So when I look at the discography of the band, I really look at Exciter being the starting point of the post-Alan Wilder era. With Ultra, while it is kind of standing there as a bit of an anomaly. So I know people are going to look, it's a very subjective way to look at things, but that's how I see it. I was super excited for this album, and it's an album that I quite enjoy, even though it is a bit more minimal than what we've what we were accustomed to with the band, and Martin was very open about him going through a writer's block, which I think, is apparent in the album to a certain extent. But I found this thread, and I wanted to share with you a couple of comments that were made and share my thoughts on it. So somebody had asked, does anybody know how Mark Bell got in the spotlight during the works of the Exciter album? And from the Mullins Depeche Mode biography book, Daniel Miller naturally was selected to make the phone call to Mark Bell, as the LFO founder recounts. And he passed away, unfortunately, in 2014. Daniel first contacted me in the second half of May of 2000 and asked if I was interested in working on the new Depeche Mode album. I'd be lying if I didn't say I was really excited. I always loved their stuff. I met everyone about a week later. We all went to a restaurant and just had a laugh, really. We decided to start as soon as possible. Gore enthuses, he's just so good with sounds. He can visualize sounds in his head. He goes to a keyboard and he creates that sound. It's not even just about the keyboard. It's the whole vision of the song. I just can't do that. I really have to test something out. If it works, keep it in, and if it doesn't, take it out. Now, somebody followed that up saying that he was chosen because of his work with Bjork, pre- and post-Exciter, and obviously because of his involvement with LFO, who in turn remixed Home and Lied to Me. I think he was a really amazing musician and sound designer, but being in the role of a producer is more difficult. Imagine how it is to not be just an engineer, but also a generator of the vision and style of an entire DM project. Dave Gahan was somewhat famously quoted as saying, Exciter is Mark Bell's album. And listen, I totally agree with what Dave said in that statement. Exciter is still Depeche Mode, but it does sort of stand out, as do other albums as well, but it does sort of stand out on its own in its textures, in its vibe, in its soundscapes. If you remember, they had released it was like a 1 minute, like a 90-second snippet of, well, it was a 90-second piece of music that was snippets of a few songs on the album. I remember hearing these snippets so many times and people going and remixing these particular just small portions of tracks off of Exciter into full remixes of the song. I did the same thing working at a radio station at the time and being somewhat savvy with Adobe Audition, going and trying to create full songs and remixes out of just very small, and it was probably more than 90 seconds now that I think about it. It might have been a couple minutes, because I remember people were making sort of fully fleshed out remixes based off of just the little samples that they received from these songs. But I spent so much time with those samples that still to this day, when I go and listen to Exciter and I hear those particular portions of the songs, they completely stick out because I had listened to those particular portions of the songs so many times when they released the sample of what the album was going to sound like. But the album does sound different in and of itself. I Am You, to me, is a real standout track. I absolutely love that song. And I recently did a revisit to Exciter over Halloween, as I mentioned on a previous episode, because I pulled Dead of Night off of it. I quite enjoyed the Exciter tour. I went on, I went and saw several of those shows, and it has a special memory for me because we were pretty early into our marriage, myself and Melinda, and we'd gone to several of those shows and traveled to see those shows together, which I believe was probably the last time. I think after that I ended up going to most of the shows by myself because we had children at home, and she had kind of fallen out of her. She still loves Depeche Mode, but not like I did. She's one of those individuals that was really into them, and then as their music continued, she kind of fell away and isn't as familiar with their more recent stuff. But I really enjoyed that album. Dream On, I wasn't the biggest fan of as a single, and certainly not a lead single. But that being said, I'm not sure what song you would have gone to lead with off that album as sort of a quintessential Depeche Mode track, other than perhaps I Feel Loved. But I like the consistency of that particular record, and if I'm in the mood to kind of chill out and listen to Depeche Mode, Exciter usually fits the bill. I will add this, though. Of the post-Alan Wilder era, the promotional artwork and Anton Corbijn shot pictures related to all the promotion around Exciter, I love. It's probably my second favorite in terms of graphics relating to Depeche Mode content, next to Violator, which is probably my favorite. I really thought that Anton did just top-notch work. And if I was going to compare any albums, I would probably, in terms of the promotion around them, Exciter, the name, the artwork, it all reminds me very much of Violator in the best ways. Almost to a point where I think in terms of the artwork, where Violator and that rose is so distinct but minimal in nature, I think that you could have an argument that Exciter is even better in terms of that and what Anton Corbijn brought in his photography. But again, you put a gun to my head, I'm going to go Violator. I appreciate that more. But I love what Anton did around Exciter. It's almost as if the promotion around it was better than the album in and of itself, while I still quite enjoy that album. So this comes from MSN, but this is an article written by Lee Vowell. Never heard of this person before. As I typically do, like I said, I go online and I look for, hey, are there new stories up? Is somebody writing about Depeche Mode? And that's the case here. I might have had somebody send this to me, to be honest with you. But the title of the article was 5 of the Best Live Songs in the History of Rock Music. Now, this is really subjective, including the list that they put together here, which even I have issue with, be that as it may. The article goes as follows. Some bands make studio records and sell them to the public and make a good living doing that. Real bands play gigs. We don't just want to hear the music. We want to see it, breathe it, live it. Still, being a great live band is difficult because there is a trick to sounding great, but also being visually entertaining. Elite bands can take what they record, change it over time, ever so slightly live, and augment the experience for fans. Queen is fantastic live, but them being boring with Freddie Mercury singing the songs would have been impossible. Devo is another band that is good live, though one might be surprised by that because they sound so studio. Each band should have at least one killer song that the crowd can sing along with. After all, concerts are communal events. For 2 hours, we aren't just listening to a band, we are part of it. It's the height of humanity. So, this is what this particular individual put together as a list of the 5 best live songs in the history of rock music. First on the list was The National by Mr. November. Never heard the track, never heard of Mr. November. The second was Slipknot Duality. Actually quite like that song, although I've never heard the live version. And I'll be honest with you, I didn't bother to go seek out the live versions of any of these songs, simply because I was only interested in what came in at number 3, and that was Depeche Mode and Walking in My Shoes. There are some who think seeing a Depeche Mode concert is like going to any 80s new wave revival. There will be a lot of keyboards and poppy hits and simply a fun time. Part of that is true with Depeche Mode, the fun part. For anyone making the assumption that DEM is simply another new wave band, they would be far off the mark. Now, that's all they had to say regarding this. However, they're not wrong. Walking in My Shoes is a spectacular track live. You know it, and I know it. And as a matter of fact, I'd be somewhat hard-pressed to think of a better Depeche Mode song that is live, but I welcome your suggestions. I think Enjoy the Silence is up there, although I will say that I appreciate more of the earlier live versions of Enjoy the Silence, since I don't think it gets any better than what they did with Enjoy the Silence on the Devotional Tour. They've gotten formulaic in really riffing off of that middle portion of the song before kicking into the end of the song. You almost get into, a Depeche Mode jazz, even though it's far from jazz. But if you ask me what is my favorite live track to go and listen to, it would be the live version of Enjoy the Silence that was released as a B-side of Walking in My Shoes on the CD single, which I find is interesting considering Walking in My Shoes is such a great song live. The other songs on the list, by the way, were Kiss, God of Thunder, and The Black Crowes' Remedy. And again, I think that any, music fan would probably take issue with the top 5 best live songs being those 5. And again, I would probably find my own 5 best songs, even outside of Depeche Mode, that I would include in a list on that long before the ones that were chosen, mostly because I'm unfamiliar with some of them. However, Depeche Mode and Walking in My Shoes would certainly be on that list. TalkShowNerd@gmail.com or leave a comment up on YouTube. Let's get to your listener feedback this week. First off, we hear from Glenn1965, who says this: Hey, John, yes, Don't Say You Love Me is just incredible. I find myself singing when it ends. It has that effect. I do as well, although Don't Say You Love Me, for me personally, is a tough one to sing in the car. Just saying. But Glenn, I agree with you. I absolutely love that song. Companion song to Don't Say You Love Me would be In Your Room, hands down. Dante Kane writes, random DM observation. I read that David Bowie would put words into a hat and use them randomly for lyrics, song titles, etc. My first exposure to Memento Mori was, these songs sound too familiar. I am right there with you. I remember when the first images were leaked for the back of the album, and we saw the song titles, and many people, including myself, simply did not believe that these were the actual song titles. So he runs through the list: Never Let Me Go, to which he says, Never Let Me Down, plus Boys Say Go, People Are Good, People Are People, plus It's No Good, Ghosts Again, Ghost, Never Let Me Down Again, Always You, Always, plus I Feel You or I Am You. Thank you for your dedication to DM. Yeah, and it's funny because once I, and thank you, Dante, I appreciate that. Once I confirmed that that was indeed the track listing, I was a bit concerned that when we got to the songs themselves, the song titles being included in the song would make it sound too much like the other songs they were referencing, but that simply isn't the case. I just don't think the band thinks about those things. I really, really don't. Which makes me wonder, with those moments on Memento Mori that harken back to other Depeche Mode songs, the squeal in People Are Good, the sometimes in Caroline's Monkey. Of questions I would ask is, did you do that intentionally, or were you even aware that those portions of the song sounded like other songs? I Feel You's squeal and Clean and the Sometimes. I just don't think the band thinks about that. I don't think Martin thinks about that. That's my take. But I could be wrong. All right, David Fulton writes this. Okay, if we're talking about DM failures, any love I have for Hole to Feed was crushed under the weight of the abomination that is Eric Wertheim's promotional video. And I really like Tim and Eric, so this is like a double betrayal. And I forgot that it was Eric from Tim and Eric that had directed Hole to Feed. My gosh, that video is just bad. Nothing short of a Men in Black / Eternal Sunshine of the Spotless Mind wholesale erasure of the memory of the video could ever redeem the song in my eyes. I'd rather listen to Our People on a 12-hour loop than endure a single play of Hole to Feed. I didn't have another sound effect to play. I just like the way that he wrote that. Kinda not the band's fault, but someone was clearly asleep at the quality control monitor. What a topic. I prefer to think of these as missed opportunities rather than failures, which I think is largely subjective anyways. Anyone can put together a list of songs that includes what's your name, photograph of you, but I think it's more fun to imagine what might have been, as regret is more interesting than disappointment. Not going with a superior track listing of Speak and Spell that included Ice Machine, Shout, and the unreleased television set, and did away with I Sometimes Wish I Was Dead and the aforementioned What's Your Name. Not releasing Told You So, and then as singles. What happened with the promotion of Construction Time again? 2 singles, the only studio album not to chart in the U.S., Where Was the Love? Oh, well, I guess that's what mixtapes are for. No live releases for the Violator tour. It's been said many, many times, how could the most consequential promotional period of the band's career not have official live recordings? Which, again, kind of makes you wonder what's going to happen with Memento Mori. Not pushing Dangerous to be a James Bond theme song. In general, this B-side could have been easily promoted more. It was an alternative radio hit. John, you probably heard it on K-Rock a few times, as I did. Yes, absolutely. But imagine a remix of the song appearing over the opening strings of a 007 adventure. Dangerous is at least as good, if not better, than Duran Duran's View to a Kill. I think friend of the show, Matt, is going to have words with you. I can see the silhouettes of sexy women and men with guns already. Missing out on doing MTV Unplugged, brad@dm.com, has in the past cryptically referred to the band being positioned to perform the acoustic showcase during the devotional era, but plans fell through. Maybe cold feet from a band that wasn't ready to completely let go of their synths. The Memento Mori tour set list, not including more from the actual album they were promoting. What a crime that Don't Say You Love Me, People Are Good, and Never Let Me Go didn't get the live treatment. For your information, according to the official DM Instagram, Don't Say You Love Me and Photographic were indeed prepared for the Memento Mori tour, but for whatever reason, didn't make the final cut. With the exception of a live World Violation release, I don't lose much sleep with the coulda, shoulda with DM. There have been more than enough surprises to make up for any oversights. Thank you for the weekly Depeche fun, David. And David, thank you. I had a good time with that. All right, listen, that wraps up this week's look at Depeche Mode. As always, I appreciate you checking out the show. And if you also read science fiction, as always, the Depeche Mode podcast is brought to you by EMBARK. This holiday season, treat yourself, a friend, or a family member with science fiction inspired by the movies of my youth and current as well, set in the future where air and space flight culture has replaced car culture. Inspired in part by Depeche Mode, the world we live in life in general, life in the so-called space age. The main character of the series himself is a massive Depeche Mode fan at a time when the music of the 80s through the 2000s, and now, is nostalgic and popular among the characters of the story. It features some references, both direct and indirect, to Depeche Mode, while ultimately telling an exciting science fiction adventure story. As Earth faces its end, follow pilots Taft, Katha, and their ragtag crew on a journey of survival across the galaxy as they fight for humanity's future among the stars. I hope you'll take a moment, head on over to Amazon.com. If you like your science fiction to be epic, filled with romance, unique action sequences, EMBARK is perfect for you. It's written for adults, but great for ages 11 plus. Look for EMBARK, EMBARK, and pick up book 1 today, Jon, Jon Justice. Available in ebook, free on Kindle Unlimited, hardcover, paperback, and audiobook. Thank you so much for checking out this week's episode. As always, I hope wherever you are, you're happy, you're healthy, you're safe. I look forward to hearing from you. TalkShowNerd@gmail.com. God bless, and I'll talk to you again next week. Bye.